In July 2015, a man named Michael Pachenko died on a construction site in Toronto after a trench collapsed, burying him in the soil. 7 years later, a coroner's inquest is making 10 recommendations for the Ministry of Labour to improve safety. The ministry this week rejected all 10. This all comes just months after 2 men died in Ajax, Ontario, in a trench collapse. Patty Coates is president of the Ontario Federation of Labour. Patty, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Amanda, for having me.
So let's just start with what's going on here, because, of course, when a tragedy like this happens, the one silver lining we cling to is that there's learning from it and other tragedies are prevented. What is your understanding of why the ministry rejected the 10 recommendations?
To be honest, I don't understand why they did not accept the recommendations. We know that in a coroner's inquest, it involves an independent jury that looks at what had happened, what worked, what didn't work, and where the ministry needs to go, and providing the ministry with recommendations. So it's actually very disappointing that they are not going forward with any of these recommendations. And some are very simple. More unannounced inspections, mandatory trench safety training for workers, stronger penalties for companies with repeated safety violations, and a requirement for a health and safety representative at smaller work sites. The ministry said no, and that I think is quite sad for the workers. It's sad for Michael's family, who was hoping that something positive would come out of this coroner's inquest.
So one of the extraordinary things here is just how long it took for this inquest to take place. I have to say, 2014 to 2022. The ministry has said, from what I understand, that it doesn't need to implement the recommendations because in that period of time, many of them have been implemented. Is there some validity in that argument? And of course, we're going to put that in the context that a trench collapse just happened in this province, killing 2 workers.
Well, exactly. And, yes, you might have something in writing. You might already have regulations. I mean, we do have, under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, there are regulations governing excavations, and they're fairly straightforward. But again, if there isn't more unannounced inspections, they're not, those violations aren't going to be seen. And if there isn't stronger penalties for companies that have repeated safety violations, it's useless. And I think that is something that we need to really push for. It needs to be stringent. And again, I believe there's been over 60 deaths in Ontario just this year, many of them on construction sites. So something is not going right. Yeah. And, the government, they introduced this mandatory health and safety training for smaller workplaces, but it's a one-day e-learning program, and it's what we call click and play and walk away style format, which really doesn't really get to the meat and potatoes of what needs to happen on work site.
Patty, so good to have you for this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Patty Coates is president of the Ontario Federation of Labour. Time for the takeaway and digging deep for the holidays. A survey of Canadians' charitable giving plans paints a grim picture this year. Imagine Canada's annual survey reveals that fewer Canadians plan to give at all this year. Just 48% will make room in their budget for charity. And of those 48%, more than a third plan to give less than they normally would. This is to be expected, you would think, given that uncertainty about the future is running high. Most Canadians are feeling the pinch of higher costs. From mortgages to food, our disposable income is down. This same survey shows how much harder life is for Canadians. 1 in 10 report needing to rely on some form of charitable support to get by. And here's the problem. Times are tough for just about everyone. And while we may be at or near the end of rate hikes by our central bank, many Canadians are already at a point of pain when it comes to mortgage costs. That could last for months before rates have any chance of heading the other way. That stress is also showing up in this survey, with far fewer Canadians reporting a sense of financial well-being than they did a year ago. Only 44% report feeling more hopeful this year than they did last year. Add it all up, and it's easy to see why we might be feeling a little Scrooge-like. But now is not the time to forget charity. Imagine, which represents the 170,000 registered charities and nonprofits in Canada, says the holiday period can be the most important for many, with the bulk of fundraising happening in just a few weeks. My takeaway? It's no secret that Canadians are feeling the sting of higher costs and may have less to share this year. But let's not forget that while we may have less, others have nothing at all. That's Taking Stock for this week. I'm Amanda Lang. Thanks for being with us.